In this video, we're going to do a brief reminder of how we work with fractions. Okay, fractions are important when working with almost any type of math, really. But for us in calculus, they're going to be particularly important. So a lot of the fractions arise in a lot of different situations, and we need to be able to simplify them and work with them. So we're going to start by reviewing just the basic fraction rules. So when you're multiplying fractions, what you want to do, so I'm starting with multiplying and dividing because they're actually easier than addition and subtraction. So when you're multiplying, in order to multiply a fraction by another fraction, you simply multiply straight across. So what I mean by that is the numerator times the numerator, or the top, and then you do the bottom, the denominator, times the other denominator. Okay, so in this example, I have 2/5 times 3/4. So you just multiply straight across. So that's going to be 2 times 3 on the top, and I wrote a 5 when it should be a 4, and 5 times 4 on the bottom, so we're going to get 6/20. Now, to go into our next operation is simplifying fractions. So we shouldn't really leave this one like this, okay, because there are common factors here, but I'm going to leave that anyway, and talk about how we would go about simplifying them, and then maybe we'll reduce it after. So to simplify fractions, you want to reduce a fraction to its best form, then you want to remove all the common factors that they share in the numerator and the denominator. Okay, so for instance, 24/42, so I know that this is 2 times 12 over 2 times 21. Okay, so then if you think about the multiplying fractions, it works the same the other way. So I could actually write this as 2/2 times 12/21. And then 2/2 is a 1. This is like multiplying by 1. So this is just 12/21. Okay, now am I in the best form? I want to think, okay, well, do 12 and 21 have anything in common? And they do. So it's okay that you might not get it right away. I just immediately saw that these were even, so that's why I wrote them as multiplied by 2. But I guess they had a better common factor. Okay, but we can just keep going with this one. So 12 and 21, I know 12 is 3 times 4, and 21 is 3 times 7. Okay, so again, 3/3 is like a 1, so it cancels out, and then I get it reduced to 4/7, and 4 and 7 have nothing in common. So this would be its best form. Okay, so here it's fully reduced. Okay, so now if we were to go up here and complete this one, 6 is 2 times 3, and 20, I mean, we know is 5 times 4, but those are not up here. So I'm going to write it as 2 times 10. Okay, so then the 2's would cancel, and this would actually reduce to 3/10, which is how I would want to leave my answer. Okay, so 6/20 isn't the best way to leave it. You always want it in its most simple form. Okay, so dividing fractions. To divide one fraction by another, what we do is, so we have a fraction over a fraction. You flip the bottom one if they're on top of each other. Okay, so that means it's going to be the second one if they're not. So if they're written like it was below, and then you multiply instead. Okay, so if I had, like I do here, 2/5 divided by 3/4, So I could actually write this as 2 over 5 divided by 3 over 4. That's what I mean, the bottom one. So this second one is the one that's doing the dividing. So it's on the bottom. So what I would do is I take my 2/5 and then I multiply by 4/3. So that's 3/4 flipped over. And then we multiply, so we just multiply straight across. So that's 2 times 4 over 5 times 3. So that's going to be 8 over 15. And 8 and 15 have nothing in common. So this would be our reduced answer. Okay, so that's how we do division. Okay, now to the harder ones. So addition, subtraction. So if you want to add or subtract fractions, you need to find a common denominator first. You need to find a common denominator, and then, oops, you add or subtract the tops, and the bottom stays the same. Okay, so here I have 2/5 minus 3 over 4. So I'd want to make a common denominator. So I want something, the smallest thing is the best thing, but anything really will work. Something that 5 divides and also 4 divides. Okay, so I think 20 is going to be the smallest thing here that's going to work. So I need to make them both over 20, and the way that I do that is to times them by 1, so a fancy 1. So for 2/5, I need to multiply it by 4 over 4, and for 3/4, I need to multiply it by 5 over 5. Okay, so that's going to give me a common denominator. So these are just fancy 1s. Okay, so 2 times 4 is 8, so that's going to be 8 over 20, minus 3 times 5 is 15, so minus 15 over 20, and now I can put them on the same bottom and just subtract the tops. So I'm actually going to get -7 over 20. And 7 and 20 have nothing in common, so that is a reduced final answer. Okay, now when you're working with fractions, or anything really, you need to remember the order of operations. So you probably have heard this acronym BEDMAS. So just to remind you, maybe I'll do it this way. So this is telling you the order of operations. Okay, so we want to do the brackets first, so anything in brackets, and then we're going to deal with exponents. Okay, and then division and multiplication, and then addition and subtraction. Okay, so it goes in this order here. Now, they write it this way because it sounds better, but these two are actually able to switch, as are these two. Okay, but everything else has to stay in that order. So whenever you're doing something, you want to make sure you do it in this order. So here's a little simple one. So what you want to be careful of, it's very tempting to cancel these 12s. Okay, because it's both 12. We can't do that because we have to do the brackets first. And when you have a fraction, there's actually like brackets on the top and the bottom as well. Because this big line is saying take this thing and divide it by this thing. So if I wanted to do this, I have to simplify in that bracket, so that's an 8. Okay, and then I'm going to want to simplify the top, so that's going to be a -4. And now I just want to reduce. Okay, so 4 is 4 times 1, and 12 is 3 times 4. So this would simplify to negative 1/3. Okay, so that's sort of an easier example, just using the order of operations. Okay, so let's try a complicated example. So this is something we often will encounter in calculus. So they're fractions within fractions. Okay, now because this is so complicated, I'm going to do it in two different ways. Some people prefer one over the other. You can do it either way. It doesn't matter. So the first method I'm going to do is, so you want to remember that there's like, again, big brackets here. So it's this whole thing divided by h. So the first thing we're going to do is just what we did up above, is simplify the top. So in order to simplify the top, there's a subtraction of fractions. I need to make a common denominator. Okay, so let's just write it out again. All over h. Now when you have fractions within fractions, it's important to remember what is your big divide line. Okay, so this is going to be important to remember that this was the division we were trying to do, because it can get confusing. Okay, so for here, I want to make a common denominator. So you might think that the common denominator is just 2 plus h. Okay, because this one has a 2. Can I just add plus h? Okay, well I can't, because when you add to the top and the bottom, it's not like you're not adding 1, because you can only add if you have a common denominator. So what we need to do, we can only multiply by 1. So I have to multiply this by something to get this, which I can't do because I don't know what h is. So what we can do, so a common denominator you can always use is this denominator times this denominator. Okay, so that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to times this one by 2 over 2. And over here, I'm going to times by 2 plus h over 2 plus h. Okay, so that's going to give me 2 over 2 times 2 plus h minus 2 plus h over 2 times 2 plus h. Okay, so now I have the common denominator. Again, I want to make sure this line is noticeable. So now I have the common denominator, so I can put them together over that denominator. Okay, now it's important, again, that this minus, when it's on the outside of the fraction, it means that it has to subtract the whole top. Okay, so I actually need to add brackets there. So this is going to be 2 minus 2 plus h. Okay, all over h. So here's why it's important. It would get confusing if I didn't know this was the main one. Okay, because I actually want this fraction divided by this thing, which I could write as a fraction. Okay, I'm going to at some point. I'm just going to simplify the top first. Okay, so this minus has to go into both things. So I have 2 minus h over 2 plus h. And you could expand on the bottom as well if you wanted. All over h. And I'm just going to continue here. So 2 minus 2 is 0. So I just get minus h over 2 times 2 plus h, all over h. Okay, now here, again, remember that this fraction over this. So I have division, but the bottom one isn't really a fraction. So what I'm going to do is make it a fraction. So h is the same as h over 1. Okay, so now I'd want to flip the bottom one, which is going to be 1 over h, and then multiply instead. Okay, now when you're multiplying, well, let's just multiply it out. So this is negative h times 1 is just negative h, and then I have 2h, 2 plus h. So these things are all multiplying, so I can write them in any order I want. And now h over h is a 1. So those cancel out now because they're multiplying everything on the top and everything on the bottom. And I would get minus 1 over 2 times 2 plus h. Okay, and that's as simplified as we can make it. Okay, so that's one method. Another way you can do it is to multiply the top and the bottom of the big fraction by this common denominator. Okay, so let's see how that one works. So it's 1 over 2 plus h minus 1 over 2 all over h. So I'm going to take this top and I'm going to multiply it by what the common denominator is going to end up being, which is 2 times 2 plus h. And whatever I do to the top, I have to do also to the bottom. Whoops. Okay, so this is so what I'm doing here is multiplying by my fancy 1. Okay, now when I do that, this has to get expanded through these brackets. Okay, down here there's only one thing there on the bottom, so that doesn't matter. So on the bottom, I'm just going to have 2h times 2 plus h. I just like that order, but they're all multiplied. Okay, on the top, I'm going to have 2 times 2 plus h over 2 plus h minus 2 times 2 plus h over 2. Okay, and now if I look at the top, I can see on the first one I have 2 plus h over 2 plus h. Okay, well that's a 1, so those cancel out. And on the second term I have 2 over 2, so that's also a 1, so those cancel out. So my top is going to simplify to 2 minus 2 plus h. Okay, and now I can put this negative through. So I have 2 minus h over 2h, 2 plus h. 2 minus 2, again, cancel. So I get minus h over 2h, 2 plus h, which is what we had before. And again, we would cancel the h's because everything's multiplied, and now I can. And I would get negative 1 over 2 times 2 plus h. Okay, which is the same as what we had in the first method. Now, so I think that this one is generally shorter. It takes less time and space maybe, but it might be harder to do this. I don't know. I always find the first method is more intuitive for me. But again, you're welcome to use either. They both work the same way. But those are two different ways you can approach this simplification. And that's very brief introduction to fractions.